Hi, I'm Kwame Owusu-Kessie, the CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's conversation about leveraging the American Rescue Plan for education. But before going into the meat of that topic, I want to take a moment to recognize that today is the one-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And we're reminded about the multiple pandemics that have plagued this nation since the start of 2020. But yet, we have a unique opportunity to set the course of this nation on the right path. Today's conversation is going to be thinking about how we can leverage this unique moment to rethink and reimagine education. We now have a moment where we can remove the excuse of no longer having the financial resources available to think innovatively about the work that is so important to us. And we will be honing in and focusing on how we can be creative with our unique opportunity this summer. Over $129 billion have been made available. And we're hoping that this conversation today will be able to hear from experts throughout the field, from different perspectives, how we can come together, share best practices and strategies in order to enhance learning. We are uncertain about what the collective loss will be from learning as a result of the pandemic. But what I am certain about is that this opportunity will allow us to be able to make a meaningful investment in the communities that we care about. I'm looking forward to hearing all of the perspectives for such tremendous experts who've had long expertise and long experience within the field, and hoping that we will be able to continue the conversation as we are in partnership and community with one another. Because as I've said previously, this is nation building work, and it is our collective responsibility to step up in this moment, to be able to step up to the mantle of leadership and be able to lead the charge for this next generation for young people. So with that said, I would like to introduce the founder of the Harlem Children's Zone and one of the leads of the William Julius Wilson Institute, Mr. Geoffrey Canada.
Thank you, Kwame. What a moment we find ourselves in. And I just want to set the stage for a second before I introduce our special guest who's going to share some words with us. The worst crisis in my entire lifetime, 45 years in education, the worst health crisis we've ever faced. And I have seen this country respond to this moment in a matter of seasons. There was a season for the doctors and the nurses, and you all remember them on the front lines. We remember how overwhelmed they were, the heroism showing up when folks were dying and they themselves were dying. There was a season for the scientists. We had to create vaccines. It was an impossible task, but this country was not going to be able to recover if we didn't have the vaccines. And so you saw the work of Moderna and Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. That season has happened, and it potentially is saving millions of lives. And then there was a season for politics. How are we going to recover? How are we going to get the money? How are we going to make sure that our young people had a real opportunity to rebuild after this horrific moment? And this season right now is about us educators. This country cannot recover unless our schools are able to provide support, unless our children can come back to school. This is the moment that America is counting on educators to rescue this country. And I mean that literally, to rescue America. So when we decided to focus on summer, because it is literally right around the corner, the person that I first asked to be a guest speaker with us today is Randi Weingarten. I went to Randi. I've known Randi for, I won't say how many decades. Randi and I, we're going to protect our ages from the rest of the world. We've known one another for quite some time. And we have had fierce debates on education. We are both so passionate about the children and the teachers in this country. But I want to say something. The 1.7 million teachers that Randi represents as president of the American Federation of Teachers are the essential workers necessary to rebuild America. And we've got to partner in every way. Those of us in the not-for-profit field have to partner with our teachers and our schools if we're going to give our children a chance to move forward. So I asked Randi if she would come in and share some words with us today. And I'm honored that she said yes. And Randi, welcome to our webinar.
Jeff, my dear friend, I feel like we have walked sometimes different paths, and we've walked sometimes the same path, but right now we must gallop together in order to help our kids. And I'm very moved by what you just said about the seasons, and thinking about the seasons, and thinking about what happens in the season of a summer and the season of a fall as we harvest. Sometimes if you think back in terms of the harvest and what one needs to do, and how you create joy, and how you create openings, and how you nourish souls. And what I really wanted to talk about a bit was what you said and what I just saw on the video before. So of course I have a couple of notes, but let me riff off this moment, which is a moment of many of the ending of some pandemics and the being in the middle of some others. We are at a year after George Floyd was killed. Today, I have several members of my union who are in that square because we are trying to help make that square into a memorial. And today, there were shots rung out in that square. Again, a way of the hate that we must find ways to confront. And thankfully, everyone is fine. But it reminds us that we must fight hate. And what is the best way of fighting hate? Yes, family by family, community by community, but using schools. School as a center of community, whether it is a Harlem children's zone school, whether it is a public school, whether it is in rural Appalachia, or whether it is in the middle of Harlem. And what way can we help this summer, but using summer as a way of helping kids get their mojo back, of helping disrupt the education disruption that has happened over the last 14 months. So for my union, this moment of time is about how we physically return to schools this fall, 5 days a week, because we are place-based, as someone said earlier. But it's not just the return, it's the recover, it's the repair, and it's the reimagining. So if we think about the recover and the repair, think about wrapping services around leveraging the American Rescue Plan to wrap services around schools, nurses, psychologists, social workers, after-school programs, so that we have those things. Why not have 25,000 community schools around the country? And when we think about reimagining, just like those scientists discovered over a weekend, the Moderna vaccine, that amazing scientist, Kizzy, who did that, why not help our kids get engaged in science and civics, to discern truth from fiction, to find the uncertainty, and to have the kind of project-based instruction we now have in terms of career tech ed? Why not make every single school a welcoming and safe environment for all? Why not finally do that in a moment of time like this? But it requires us working together. It requires disrupting the partisanship and the divisiveness, and us being in our different tribes, which is part of why I so honor my relationship with Jeff. but it starts this summer. It can start now, because this summer can be a moment of academic work in mornings and enrichment in afternoons. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Take Miami-Dade. They're using the money from the American Rescue Plan, $50 million, to offer in-person and virtual summer programs to 10 times more children this year than previously. And in addition to the academic classes in the morning and the course recovery, they're going to have fun with dance, with art, with band, with sports, with cooking, with STEM and creative writing. And school counselors are going to be at each and every one of their school sites, and mental health services are going to be available to any student in need throughout the summer, either in person or virtually. They're using the American Rescue Fund funds to do this. And then you take Cincinnati, where all the schools are community public schools. They're offering also voluntary courses in the morning, followed by enrichment in the afternoon. And one of our members, a kindergarten teacher at Euler Elementary School, is on their summer planning committee. And he was saying that this is Jamal Davis, he was saying that they're planning a summer experience like no other, with nature expeditions, with journaling, with broadcasting, with inviting kids to the nearby aquarium to bring sea life to school. Why do I also choose Cincinnati? Cincinnati is on the border of Ohio and Kentucky. We can use schools to repair a nation by first and foremost working to nourish the soul of our students and create the kind of joy and happiness that is needed to disrupt stress and resilience. So I look forward to working with you each and every step of the way to use this moment to reimagine how we help all of our kids thrive. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Jeff and the Harlem Children's Zone.
Randi, thank you so much for those words. I can't tell you how excited we are to be on this journey with you and the teachers and the schools around this country as we begin to rebuild better, as you put it, because we have this opportunity right now. And we're not going to drop the ball at the William Julius Wilson Institute. We're going to continue to try to lift up best practice around this country. Well, the lifting up is going to be hard without a person who is focused on this work every single day, working with the Place Matters folks around the country. And I am happy to share the leadership of the William Julius Wilson Institute with our own Hailing Price. You all know Hailing. He was moderating the last webinar we've done. Hailing, thanks for all you're doing and all you will do. And I'm going to turn this section over to you.
Thank you, Randi, for those powerful remarks. You know, we have some tremendous allies, some really transformational leaders in this work, and we can't get it done without you all. And it's my pleasure to introduce another member of that powerful network, Aaron Philip Dworkin. He serves as the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association, and it's a pleasure to reconnect. Aaron and I had the opportunity to engage years ago when he led After School All-Stars, and he continues the work around thinking about closing the opportunity gap for young folks around the country. The National Summer Learning Association is an organization that works nationally, and their mission is to convince, connect, and equip program providers, education leaders, families, and communities to deliver high-quality summer learning opportunities. And they advocate for this work year-round. So today, Aaron's going to walk us through some of the opportunities that are emerging across the federal landscape and help us wrap our minds around really what this moment might look like as it relates to continuing engagement through the summer. So with that, I'll pass it to Aaron.
Thank you, Hailing, and great to be with you as always again as we continue our careers together. And thank you, what an honor to be with Jeff Canna and Randi Weingarten, leaders and inspirations to me personally and for our whole field for so many years, and Kwame and the Harlem Children's Zone, and everyone who's listening, and Lauren, who's also a partner who we'll be hearing from Bell. Again, my name is Aaron Dworkin. I'm the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association. An organization that's been around for more than 25 years. If you've ever heard the phrase summer slide or summer learning loss, that comes out of original research from our organization. And I'm going to just walk you through a few slides to share, kind of emphasize and and kind of underscore the words of Jeff and Randy about the moment we're in, the opportunity we have, the commitment we need to make to all our communities and families and students coming out of COVID. And I just do want to make a line that I wrote down, the line Randy used about we need to use this summer to get make sure children get their mojo back. That might become a new tagline for us, but I think it's true. And just want to share with you how we could do it, and to remind folks that no one's alone in doing this work, and that there's a lot of support, there's a lot of expertise and evidence of what works. And anyone who's going to be taking advantage of the funding that we now have coming down from the federal to the state to the school districts to also work with community partners knows that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So again, NSLA, this is what we do. We're focused on, we're one piece of a bigger puzzle here, one key strategy, one lever about how do we, again, combat summer learning loss, close these achievement opportunity gaps, which research shows grow most dramatically between lower income and higher income students over the summer months. And we bring together lots of partners. We work with school systems, summer camps, government youth-serving agencies, libraries, parks and rec, public housing, summer youth employment, the world of nonprofits, like many of you. And then there are a lot of unlikely partners who work with young people, especially in the business community, that we could talk about. So I just want to start with the why, as our friend Simon Sinek likes to say, and just kind of explain why summer is this great opportunity for all of us, and why it's worth the investment and our time and effort. And first of all, when we talk about summer, well, summer, the word conjures up a lot of images for a lot of folks. When we talk about it in our work, in our field, in our group, it's really just it's a metaphor for inequity and opportunity. Two things that we're all fighting inequity and creating opportunity for young people. It's like we said, for what if kids were out of school for 3 months from January to March, we'd be focused on that. But we know that summer is a time when folks with lots of resources are having great experiences for their young people, and those without have less and fall further behind. And then it's this great flexibility, great creativity time where we could do new and innovative and exciting things with young people. So the way I talk about it is we talk about the 4 eyes of summer, and I'll be quick on this, but just to say it's a time for improvement, and not just for young people, for staff too. More professional development happens for educators over the summer. And I would really encourage everyone to think about it, if you're trying to reimagine, that every summer program is really a form of professional development and a chance not just to help students, but to help your staff learn new skills. When I was at After School All-Stars, every time we had a new curriculum, we would create a summer program so everyone would understand how to do it. We said no training about kids without kids. So it helps both adults, helps kids. Time for innovation, more new programs before you want to, before you scale them, test them out, try them out. You have time to get evidence on what works. We ran a new summer innovation fellowship for leaders of color who want to start new programs. We had hundreds of applicants in 2 weeks for this coming summer. We only had money to fund 3 projects, but as again, there are huge national organizations, entire schools, nonprofits that all started out as summer programs. It's this time, as all of you do so well, for when we say the term integration, really partnerships. And how do we break down these artificial silos we have in our world of education between the after school folks and the summer folks and the school day folks and all these other, we are all trying to help often the same young people in the same neighborhoods, and we have to find a way to work together. Once the school year starts, people are pretty busy. In the summer, we see a time to take a breath and a chance to get people to work together and model those partnerships that if they go well, they can carry on into the school year. And finally, as we all know, it's a time for impact, both for the students at the personal level, because a lot of experiential hands-on learning is happening that's immediate and lasting. It's also a life transition point. There's summer between middle school and high school, elementary and middle school, even high school and college. That's a time of vulnerability, which means you're open and it's a chance to have a huge impact on people. And then nationally, we have the resources, we have the expertise, we have the folks, the partners, and now we even have the funding to make this challenge of summer inequity go away. This is a solvable problem, and so we can have a huge national impact. Again, not going to go through all this, but I just want to list, this is historically why we use the term summer learning versus summer school. So if you just remember summer school and the reputation it had, over the past years, we have a group that we help convene called New Vision for Summer School, where we work with 50 district plus partners to help reimagine, like Randy was saying, and what could summer school be like, and lots of folks are doing this, especially now. But just historically, if you think about what the reputation of summer school was, it was remedial, it was a punishment, not too exciting. It typically only took place within the four walls of a school building. It only had academics offered. It was usually mandatory, but only for a few folks. Adults usually decided everything. And it felt like just an extension of what was going on during the school year, not very different or special. And when we use the term summer learning, what we're trying to say is the opposite of all that, that it's not just catching up on what you may have missed, but also you can take new courses and accelerated learning, that it's exciting, it's hands-on, it's experiential. It could actually take place. If you look at the city of Boston, they are aligned with their school district. They have certified teachers working in the zoo and the aquarium and getting course credit and working with hundreds of partners all over. So it doesn't have to only take place in the building. Obviously, like the models we all care about, combining academics, health, enrichment, social emotional learning, you make it so exciting, you don't have to make it mandatory, you make it voluntary, and lots of people want to come, and it's open to everyone, and that students have a say in what the program looks like, and chance for voice and choice and leadership, and that it feels a little different than what they've done during the school year, so people feel they can look forward to the summer and it feels distinct. So here, like the powerful, important video that we started this webinar with, is hitting on, here we are, it's May 25th. We're coming out of a historically challenging year for the whole world, but as we know, COVID was disproportionately had negative effects for certain communities, and we need to acknowledge that and address it. So you'll have a lot of information about that. And again, so now what's happened is the conversation has moved from summer learning loss to now COVID learning loss. But we want to be positive and asset-based and strength-based and talk about the gains of what could happen. But if you needed more research on this, just again, on the history of summer loss, is the National Academy of Sciences put out a report right before the COVID happened, a 2-year commission looking at the benefits and the challenges around summer. The Wallace Foundation, a great partner of ours, has lots of research on summer slide. And then you have Northwest Education Association, McKinsey, all doing reports on what's been going on for the challenges during COVID. But here's what we know. Again, hard for everyone, harder for some. And especially in low income and communities of color, I mean, think about, in the Latino community, twice as likely to have lost your job during COVID, unemployment. We know the coronavirus, hundreds of thousands of people have died disproportionately in the African-American community. And so that's real trauma. And that's something that we need to respond to. And we're meeting students and families now this summer with folks who've had a lot of real challenges. And so again, when we were talking about the mental health supports and everything else that these programs need to address, you can't just bring people back after these trauma and say, now let's do math and reading. We need to connect with kids. We say connection before content. I know all of you will be doing that. And again, just something on the mental health challenges and just how people, this is from Common Sense Media, a slide that said the lower income you were, the more time you spend in front of screens in the last year. And that's just like, you don't have resources, you don't have ways to get your children in front of other activities that are more, interactive. And just again, and we know that there are so many challenges that come from being on social media and the peer pressure as you get older and the depression that's coming from that. So just real things that are facing our kids that we all as adults and educators and youth development professionals need to make sure we're taking into consideration and designing programs that respond to them. But here's what's positive. We know how to run great programs. We have all been doing this for years, for decades. The RAND Research Foundation did a whole study institute of looking at what are the top model programs. We know what works, we know how to do them. They found 43 program models that met the highest education tier of evidence that we can learn from. So again, nobody has to start from scratch, and here's examples, but you can find these reports, we can share them with you. They also did a whole longitudinal study looking at specific districts and specific cities and showing all the gains and how to do it well, and lots of lessons. And again, we know that if you're multi-week, but with the district and combination of academics, enrichment, health and fitness, SEL, there are ways to do it. And if students are coming and they're coming multiple years, they'll have great outcomes. And so what that did is it set us all up for this moment we're in right now. Whereas there's a crisis and we need a response, and there's one piece of a solution here, and that's with the American Rescue Plan. We talked about $122 billion, $1.9 trillion total, $122 billion for K through 12 education. Up to 30 billion of that could be used for summer and after school programs focused on education recovery strategies. And so a lot of it, I won't go into all of this. We have a webinar we have that I could send out that we've done with this. The Department of Education is doing a lot of webinars to explain this, state education agencies. A lot of funding is flowing to state education agencies, state education departments. Some of the money gets to stay there and they get to decide what they want to do with it and what initiatives they want to support. And then the majority of it is going to your local education agency, your school district. And there is set aside money, specifically 1.2 billion just for projects between school systems and around summer and partners. And the same, another 1.2 billion set aside for partnerships between school districts and their after school partners. And those usually get combined, which is fine, but this time they've been set, made distinct. And just so you know, normally the largest federal funding for summer and after school is the 21st century funding. That's 1.2 billion by itself. So just to say, this is 3 times more just on that front, and so many more of these dollars to be used to support the initiatives and that you're doing. And we have it for multiple years. And so I want to encourage everyone to take a breath. We'll do the best we can this summer, but we have it for at least the next 3 years, 2022, 2023, and in part, definitely in 2024 even, for some parts of this money. So we got to get this right. We have some time, but we don't want to blow this opportunity. I won't go through this, but just so you know, at NSLA, we work on multiple levels like all of you. So we work with communities on what their systems look like to create after school and summer programs. And we have, landscape reports and all these tools to work with folks at the citywide level or county or state level. I can share some of these later. And then we also have, like I was mentioning, our new vision for summer school network. So if you're part of a district that would like to join, we'd love to have you. And we have best practices that this group has created about what makes for, an exciting hands-on new vision for summer school, summer learning. And here's where we are. And I'll just say, we're talking thousands. We represent more than 15,000 leaders in all these different domains that we were talking about, who are all trying to help young people through the summer. And so we're encouraging everyone. People are racing to understand this funding and doing the best they can to set up programs. But just remember, again, we have a few years to do this. So we will do the best we all can right now. We need to, but we have a planning guide that's called Summer Starts in September, because we need to have summer be built into everyone's year-round strategy, not just a quick in April, we have a few extra dollars, what are we going to do? That's not how we want to act. Normally, we're doing it now, fine, but the best programs, the best districts, the best partnerships are just building this into their year-round planning. And we can get better by setting goals and how to be reflective and evidence and how to learn from it. The other piece is what you all know. We're sitting here on the anniversary of George Floyd death, and we want to make sure that we are creating curriculum and space and training for programs to be culturally responsive in their practices, that their staff know how to lead conversations, that the content is what's needed, and also social emotional learning like we were describing. The other thing we need to do here is actually stretch ourselves, and we need to ask our partners, we have a lot to catch up on and a lot to offer students. And if you're an academic only student program, we want to make sure that you're finding a way to partner with groups and bring in the health and fitness and the arts and the enrichment, like we said, the SEL. But if you were a summer program that's really just focused on sports and arts and music, which is great, we're going to ask you to carve out time and work with certified teachers in your school district partners and bring in some academic support into your curriculum this summer. And people need to stretch and find those partners and reach out. Like I said, we have evidence here. This is why the government felt confident that it could make this investment in all of us, because we have evidence of what works. We know how to do it. We have the infrastructure. We have intermediaries, your statewide after school network, your citywide intermediary around after school and summer programs, and all these other associations, us included, that have resources that want to help. And then something, of course, we can't forget here is about, ultimately, this is about helping young people. And we want to make sure that they have a say in these programs. If you want people to show up at your programs, we need our students. Why don't we ask them what they want the program to look like, and put them in power and positions of leadership so they can recruit their friends and it's the program they want to go to. And how do we make sure that we're using this funding to increase not only how many students we're reaching, the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the most impacted by COVID, but that we are identifying them and making sure they get these opportunities. And then how do we just make sure that there's more programs? and that the quality of the programs we're providing are what we all want and what they deserve. And one way to always check yourself on that is if you're running a program, just ask yourself, is this a program you yourself would pay money to put your own children in? And if the answer is no, then the program's not good enough and we need to do better. So we have resources. I won't go through all these. They're on our website, but you could have this access to this deck. And just there's academic resources, best practices that we're compiling from ourselves and others that we want to share with you if you're looking for them. Same on health and safety. I also want to give a shout out to our friends at the American Camp Association who are really emerged in some of the working closely with the Center for Disease Control as real national experts on how to run a COVID safe program. And it's different state by state and community to community. So if you're looking for guidance on how to do that, they are great partners for us. A lot of other resources here on the safety and enrichment side. Again, scenario planning, we'll do the best we can. Here's some of the resources, but there are a lot of groups that have figured out how to plan well, how to plan in community, you taking into consideration all the stakeholders that are necessary. So we can set up programs that'll not only do well for the next few years while the money, but do so well that people want to keep funding these programs and make them a staple of what we offer young people. Again, here's more resources on the SCL and culturally responsive practices, CASTLE, Mentor. I'm sure you all are familiar with them. Education Trust, great partners who are trying to be helpful and available to everyone. And just the last thing to say is, if I'm only meeting you for the first time, I hope it's not our last time. We want to work with you and support you today and going forward. We have professional summer learning communities you can join that are free, of cohorts of peers talking about these issues and anything you need. We provide our own training and field consultants to work with any partners. We have webinars. We have National Summer Learning Week coming up in July, where we put a big spotlight on all the work you're all doing. And we want to make sure we lift up best practices and make sure policymakers and media know what you're doing, so they'll keep supporting you. And then we have a national conference, which will be in DC, where we'd love to have all of you to be reflecting on what we just learned from this coming summer and how do we do better for next summer by all our kids. So thanks for having us and having me, and look forward to the rest of our conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aaron, for those rich insights. There's a lot happening around summer learning. I love this idea of summer starts in September. So having a great plan weeks before summer isn't going to cut it, especially not in this environment. And we'll be sure to get those resources out to our audience so folks can check out those great guides and overviews that you've put together. And it sounds like there are other conversations coming up that we'll want to spread the word about. So thank you again, Aaron. It's great to have you with us. And with that, we're going to introduce two other friends of HCZ. Really excited about the lineup we have today. So we have Lauren Sanchez Gilbert, who comes to us from Bell Excel, which is a national organization focused on evidence-based solutions to supporting planning and management of high-quality summer and after-school opportunities. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm already getting pumped up from all the previous speakers.
All right. And our second guest speaker is no stranger to the HCZ family. That's Leslie Bernard Joseph, the CEO of Coney Island Prep and a former HCZer. And, once the member of the Army of Love, always a member. So it's great to see you, brother. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. You're invited anytime, sir. So let's get right into it. We're thinking about this opportunity for the summer. And the fact is, folks are exhausted. This year has been a tremendous push as far as educators are concerned. Young folks are feeling significant fatigue as we think about the challenges around distance learning and how to stay engaged in hybrid or remote schedules. So when we think about the urgency of the summer, how do we reframe this from summer school, which may be seen as perhaps even punitive, to something that's fun and engaging in a way that's really reimagining what learning can be? And particularly interested in your respective vantage points as both an educator and school sort of based operator versus someone who's really in the wraparound services after school and summer learning space. So Lauren, let's start with you.
Sure. I loved hearing Randi really framing our double clicking on that reimagining. This actually holds true in this space as well. We have long used summer or after school as punishment, and we've long used it as punishment for only certain children. And often those children are Black and brown children. Right. And for other children, it's seen as an opportunity to grow, to accelerate, to have great experiences, and kids are clamoring to get to these camps. Those same messages are the messages that we actually need to provide to all children moving forward. It's up to the adults to reframe the context for these young people, and stop using it as a punishment, stop using it as a negative, and start using it as it is used for others as something that's fun and exciting. All what Aaron was saying as well, really changing that conversation. But it is not a kid problem. It's not a scholar problem. This is an adult problem. And we are the ones who need to change the narrative around summer.
Makes sense. Same question, Leslie.
Strongly agree, I think, both with Lauren, Randi, and Aaron, whom we just heard from. I think the first thing I would say is we've spent the past 14 to 15 months prioritizing students' mental health and wellness and social emotional needs. Now isn't the time to throw that all away in June and July and sort of rush to saying that you have to come back to summer school because of a learning loss, because you're losing something. I think language matters tremendously. And if the first message that we're giving to students after surviving a pandemic was the first priority, is that somehow they've fallen behind in an imaginary race that adults have created for them, it is going to be more than discouraging, it's going to be damaging. And so I think it's not just a reimagining and reframing for adults. I think it's actually doubling down on the idea that something special must be done. So Martin Luther King said, something special was done to the Negro for centuries. Now something special must be done for them. I think we can say quite firmly that something special and unfortunate has been done to kids in low-income communities and to kids of color. And so something special must be done in terms of how we're imagining summer school. I think there's a ton of flexibility for what we do over the summer. The worst thing that we can do is try to spend $1 million quickly, as opposed to being smart about how we spend our resources and how we plan for what both kids and adults need to really thrive, not just for this immediate summer, but really repairing what's going to be happening over an extended period of time.
Got it. So let's talk about those dollars and how we might put them to work. There are a lot of allowable uses for these funds, and I think we got a taste of that from Aaron, but I'm interested, again, both in and out of school. What are specific activities or at least approaches you might consider when we think about shifting this frame from just sort of summer school as punitive as something that's really going to be fun and getting kids in the door so we have an opportunity to really catch them up to speed? And begin with Lauren.
Sure. It's a little bit back what to Leslie said of really understanding your community and who it is and what it is that are your goals, right? That has to be defined up front in order for you to put together a program that's actually going to create sustainable change. So the first thing I'd advise is really understanding what your objective is and how quickly can you actually meet that objective. If it is getting them back and engaged, which I would suggest right now, then that's actually what you need to aim for. What I would not do is think of this as an opportunity to do remediation. We put a lot of effort into thinking around rate of progress. It's often been called in the space learning loss, but what we really talk about is how is the rate of progress affecting the child? How fast are they learning? How slow are they learning? And it's the special educator in me coming through. It's what I did back, when I was a teacher in the classroom. How do I accelerate this? And can you ever accelerate a child's learning if you're constantly remediating? And who, again, always gets remediated? So how do we actually accelerate and use this as an opportunity to accelerate children forward? And what actually impedes acceleration? It is actually all those social emotional factors that do that. And so we need to make them available to learn by creating a program that's fun and engaging and exciting and full of success to get them to that next level.
So how are you thinking about sweetening the deal, Leslie?
So I would say there are a couple of different levers that we're talking about. So we're talking about summer learning as opposed to summer school, using the framework that Aaron just spoken about. We're really talking about extending the school year. And I think your approach should depend on the flexibility that you have for whatever system you're in. So we are, as a charter school, in a system with increased flexibility, but we're also, given our network size, we're not accustomed to providing full summer school for everybody. So what we're doing is we're shifting those additional weeks that we would provide during a summer school type setting and tacking that onto the beginning of the school year. So as opposed to having fits and starts where we end the school year sometime in June, take a little bit of a break, start up some kind of summer school type program again in July, end it to allow for time for a teacher break for professional development. We're just consolidating it all and pushing the start of the school year up 3 weeks before our district partners. So for us, what we've done is a combination of extended the school year, created the time for us to have that kind of social emotional learning, have that back to school, having kids get back to used to being in the environment in a way that is sustainable for us in the long term, where this is simply going to be our school year for now and forever. and it creates that opportunity for us to extend the school year. I think if you are in a program or in a system that does not have that same kind of flexibility, then I do think it's a lot of what Lauren is saying about structuring and creating opportunities in program that prioritizes social and emotional learning first, mental health and awareness first, trips, sports, athletics, performance, performing arts first, instead of focusing on remediation. I think what Lauren is saying is actually right. If we look at the research, it is absolutely clear that remediation has a counterintuitive effect on kids. But we didn't necessarily have to look at the research if we just listen to our kids and families about this is not a thing that they want to go to, that this is boring, that this feels like a punishment. And if we had listened to our kids and families before, then we would have known that that wasn't the right approach.
Right.
Last thing I would say about listening to communities and kids and families is if we as a school, if we're not prepared to do something in July right now for our kids and families, then why not turn that money over directly to them? Why not create a summer fund and say, we're retooling and we want to be smart about what we spend our money on in summer 22. But for now, the choice is yours. If there's a program, if there's an online course, if there's a trip, if there's anything that you want to do that enriches your child academically, socially, emotionally, or addresses some of their mental health needs this summer, we'll fund it, we'll pay for it.
You make an interesting point about process here. I want to pause this and think a little bit more about the how. It sounds like you've been in deep conversation with folks in your backyard. And while opening early is certainly one strategy folks can deploy, and not all have that flexibility, but if you're thinking about different ways to redesign a learning experience and whatever parameters are at folks' disposal, how would you think about just approaching that process in a way that's inclusive and responsive to community needs?
So redesigning the learning process, I think is a big priority of ours right now at Coney Island Prep. We're approaching it a couple of different ways. I think the first thing that we've done is we've gathered the research. The second thing that we've done, which I think is really important for us, is creating a lookbook and visuals for people that show exactly what we mean when we're saying this is our classroom vision. If you Google right now, a classroom in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, they look exactly the same. Desks are in rows and in columns. Students are facing directly towards the front of the board.
Right.
It's taken more than a century for us to reimagine what education looks like. And it's unclear to us why, right? I think when you look at an early childhood classroom, whether it's preschool or kindergarten, we expect a room that has lots of different settings, tables, carpets, rugs, places for kids to play.
Right.
But something happens in elementary, middle school, and high school where we think kids become passive learners. So what we're doing is not just showing folks the research and the language about what we want a classroom should look like, what productive struggle means, and how students perform, but actually then putting the images in front of them and saying, can you imagine what a classroom should look like or what you want it to look like for your kids? What experiences, or what do you want their college experience to look like? And now tell us what you want to put in the classroom so we can put those resources back in. ARP ESSER funds can also be used for facilities improvements that mitigate the transmission of COVID. It's hard to learn if you're sitting directly next to people, if you're right on top of people. It's easier to learn if we're creating distance and spaces, different kind of learning environments in classrooms and using technology differently. So we can use the funds for that too, to reshape and redesign what the classroom looks like, as well as the summer.
That's great, thanks. Another point you touched on earlier is on the data piece. And Lauren, I know this is where you all are really focused, sort of the evidence base for this work. So can you talk a little bit about how research and that sort of data-driven space is informing practice on the ground level?
Sure. We do put a lot of emphasis on really understanding what works and what doesn't work, equally as important. Anything in the out-of-school time space is not so different than anything within a school. The management side of how you run the program or the building or the service matters just as much as that intervention piece or programming that you're doing for the scholars. So paying attention to all of that is actually will make or break your program. And many of us know that. We've seen too many failures because there is not the right setup in the first place. Once you actually get to the programming itself, it's using practices that are known to work, and listening to those that work the closest with the children, the family and the teachers, is crucial. Yeah. We just completed a RAND study on professional development. But throughout this study, what we actually also found was that teachers became much more engaged, enlightened, and felt like they could actually make a difference in their child's lives. This should not be a surprise when they had more ability to control what they were teaching. And they had the ability to actually be responsive to their classroom's needs versus being top-down kind of prescriptive. Again, not shocking. But if we actually took this opportunity to reimagine education in totality, we could make such a difference moving forward. This is a time for acceleration of the entire field. To me, there is no opportunity to go backwards. We have technology in the classrooms. I worked really hard on having, when I was a school administrator, having a one-to-one laptop, we called it at the time, initiative. This is now everyone is. How do we actually use that to change the face and landscape to create equity for, make that equity a reality in the out of school time space? The other piece I just want to add is that we need to change where and when and how we think of education to be including community educators in the process. Cincinnati and Miami that Randi mentioned are two partners with us who are partnering with other organizations like in Cincinnati, it's with the YMCA. They are phenomenal, doing incredible work and really know the youth sector in a different way than schools. And you put those two pieces together, instead of seeing a little bit of conflict there, put them together, you have one powerful community there who's going to make differences in the lives of children.
That's a great point. And this is something that we're curious about learning more on. And this question of sort of school community partnerships. Not all providers that are thinking about wraparound services operate their own school. So when we get into the actual implementation piece, there's a lot to be discussed as it relates to this idea of integration between the wraparound and the sort of K-12 setting. So interested if you have any best practices on how we might approach those situations. It can often be politically fraught. You have partnerships that may have, history and baggage that accompany those conversations. But what's the best way we can set the table so that we're bringing educators together with service providers to make sure that we're centering the needs of students, especially in the summer context?
Yeah, I think it's really evaluating what you can bring to the table, both of them, and then also seeing it as a mutual respect, right? So in that same RAND study, the biggest contributor to actually providing professional development to the teachers was actually community-based organizations. And so for those that were a part of this, it really changed their perspective of how it is that they can work together and in a really cohesive way. But that being said, there has to be, data sharing. You can't actually align your curriculum to the school day with a partner successfully if you don't actually share data, if you don't allow for open communication, if you don't allow for good conversations with parents, and allow some of those services to actually happen in the school building with access to those resources. But there has to be trust that's built. So what activities can you create amongst the adults that create trust there, so that that then leaves the kids in a really great place?
Got it. Leslie, same question from the school side. And when we're thinking about educators, principals, LEA officials, how do we ensure that they're engaging in a meaningful way with these out of school time providers?
You started this question off with talking about some of the challenges of community-based partnerships and how it can be politically fraught.
Yeah.
I think the onus is on schools to have a mindset shift. One of the things that I'm most concerned about in this space is that there is already a power imbalance in the space about what educators do versus what folks in out of school time do. What difference between real school and after school. And I think when we look at talk about community-based organizations and the folks that are most likely to serve the kids in the community, they come from and look like the kids that they serve. And so when you have this quote unquote imbalance between folks who serve in after school, who might not have full-time roles, who may not have the same kind of benefits and salary and prestige and respect, that disrespect can't come from educators who work in the school day, who may not be from the community, who may have different privilege. And what I worry about is, as a school partner, is coming to the table with millions of dollars in federal funding at our back, dictating to community partners what we think should happen without the same kind of expertise for what should be happening during the after school day. So I think the onus is on us as a school partner, and we're doing this work right now, to really set the stage and the mindsets and really talk about what it looks like for us to serve our community. If we believe in anti-racism, then we can't be the school partner with white principals, white leaders, white teachers saying to after school, come serve our kids, but we only want it to look like this, or your data needs to look like this, so you need to teach this curriculum. The opposite must be true. We have to approach our school partners and say, we really need support. There's a gap here. There's something that we don't know how to do well, and you have the areas of expertise. The only thing that we do have is resources. How can we share these resources to help you catalyze your work and better support our kids? The mindset shift is on us. It's on school partners. They're doing us a service. We don't get to dictate how that service arrives at all times.
Powerful. Sounds like there are a range of experiences we need to honor in this process. We're entering the conversation from different vantage points. And I think that lack of alignment is often a huge pain point when it comes to that partnership piece.
I
Appreciate
wouldn't
that.
just say experiences, I would say range of voices, right?
Mm,
Money is not for us, it's for kids, it's for families. And our
Yeah.
kids and families should get to choose who and how the money gets spent. You talked about when, where, what, and how, Lauren. So I think the where, the when, all of that matters. And so if you don't want the experiences to feel like a traditional classroom, then sometimes it looks for us to look for non-traditional, quote unquote, non-traditional partners as a school.
mhm. So when you're thinking about non-traditional approaches, another piece that comes to mind is something that's emerged a few times today already, and this idea of social emotional learning. We know that COVID has taken a huge toll on physical and mental health. So when we approach those concerns, we must bundle them. And I heard you say those are really at the forefront, Leslie, but programmatically, practically speaking, how do we think about building that into these interventions? So as we're finding more touch points for meaningful learning by extending the school year, thinking about engaging through the summer, what are some ways that we can really focus on the mental health and social emotional learning needs of our young people?
Sure. So I'll approach it in two ways. I'll talk about it in terms of a curriculum, and then I'll talk about it in staffing in terms of your scheduling.
Sure.
I think from curriculum, we want to actually have the same kinds of standards and the same kind of planning that we have in a traditional school day. So I think we hold ourselves to really high standards when it comes to planning a math lesson. We should do the same thing when it comes to talking to students about growth mindset or diversity. So what we've done is we've taken national standards from CASEL, which Aaron spoke about previously, and we've embedded that in a curriculum that speaks directly to our student core values. We've taken the teaching tolerance curriculum, which comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's a curriculum around racial identity development, diversity, justice, and action. We've put all of that together in one program and one curriculum that our students are directly taught. They're directly taught and receive instruction on from their teachers. And we hold teachers accountable to planning for that and delivering instruction and getting feedback on that instruction in the exact same way that we would any other content area. I think what's different about it is a little bit in terms of the staffing and leadership support. So our social emotional team, which includes deans and social workers, are editing the content, advising the content, and giving professional development to staff members on that content in the same way that you might expect an instructional leader, a principal or vice principal to support someone academically. I think the challenging thing for us is to use the funds and resources that we've received to accelerate learning, to also invest in more mental health supports, to invest in additional social workers, to reduce caseload and ratios, and make sure that that support exists not just during the school day, but after school as well. So we're starting to think creatively, and this is hats off to HEZ, about what the staffing model looks like and what it looks like to shift the time of staff members. Do we need all staff members arriving at 7 a.m. or can some people arrive later? What does it look like to have the folks who are dedicated to out of school time really be full-time staff members and paid like full-time staff members, but have the kinds of scheduling that allow them to support later in the school day and have the same respect, prestige, and really voice and accountability about what happens during the school day as they do after school.
Very helpful, thank you.
I just
Interested in your angle, please, yeah.
I'd add one piece, and all of that is absolutely the truth. And I love the idea of actually allowing some flexible scheduling for staff. It could really make a big difference. And speaking of staff, you actually in an SEL environment that you're trying to create, you actually need to also think of your staff in that process. When we did some research with our partners over at MDRC on what factors of a teacher actually make a difference, and we looked at number of professional development hours and degrees and content expertise versus some teaching methodology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing that actually made a difference in the outcomes of the students that they were working with was their own self-efficacy. And so when you really are thinking about if that is the differentiator, is their belief in their ability to make a difference in a life of a child, we have to be very concerned about their social emotional needs, their frameworks, and how it is that they understand the social emotional needs of those that they are working with. And a lot of times when that's working with children of color, it may not actually match. And so how do we make sure that there is clear understanding that SEL does actually involve cultural relevancy and understanding how systemic racism may be affecting those scholars is actually vital to their success to improve the lives of their children. And as far as the SEL piece, how do you actually also make sure that those SEL practices are embedded within the curriculum itself so that children don't get a false sense of expertise in what they're good at, like the sports enrichment, et cetera, that they actually feel that and growth mindset achievements in math and ELA, where they often get counter messages. So how do we ensure that the teachers know it's not easy. It takes practice to be able to say and reframe yourself in a different way in those content area expertise categories.
Lauren, I absolutely want to double down on what you just said. This absolutely mirrors our experience over the past school year, and it in part informed our decision on how we wanted to structure summer. We knew heading through COVID that we wanted to focus on trauma-informed practices, that we wanted to provide additional professional development for teachers, that we knew that we needed to translate teacher professional development to what was happening in the classroom. And what we found was we couldn't go any faster because we had to help our teachers with their own trauma in the midst of COVID. We can't go faster unless we take care of adults first. And so that has been a really big piece for us. And that's in part what's informing our summer decision to not ramp up and do more in July than we were used to, and instead actually extend the school year by putting it right on the backs of the beginning of the academic calendar year. I just want to truly double down on that. I think all of those pieces around autonomy for teachers, around actually making sure that their voices are heard, are really important. So we're trying to do the work now of incorporating teachers and saying, here's our vision for what we think, what we want to be true during the summer. These are the tutoring ratios. Here's the time that we want to dedicate. Here's how we're thinking about all of these resources. And we want to inform them now so that they have time to think about it, get used to it, ask all of their questions, worry about it, take a break during the summer, and then come back ready to receive the information, as opposed to surprising them 2 weeks before it happens and telling them, this is what the school year is going to look like, deal with it. We want them to come ready in the summer to say, I know what we're thinking about, here's how we want to approach it, and here's how we want to change it.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us to Q&A in just a moment. So for folks in the audience who have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We have a few folks that have submitted questions in advance, so we've got a couple here, but we'll be seeing those in real time come in. So feel free to populate the chat again with any questions you have. But before we get into that, one last question for now, thinking about measurement and assessment. So social and emotional learning are often challenging to kind of quantify. And I know oftentimes folks are looking for kind of hard quantitative data when it's difficult to measure some of the impacts of those kinds of interventions. But I'm wondering, to what extent are you all thinking about evaluating summer or sort of wraparound kinds of interventions that might even accompany the school year as it relates to addressing learning loss?
Measurement is important. It's really crucial to understand upfront what's your objective, what's your goals, and then how are you going to measure them. Some things aren't an absolute science. This is a part where you have to be a little flexible with data and how it is that you view it. But surveying your families, your scholars themselves, the teachers that are working with those scholars is important, along with if you're going to do some academic pre-post type measures. I know there is some mixed views on, do we actually assess the kids in their academics or not, or is that not seen as a good step in this moment? But that has also been used as a way often to mask the problem that is there. It is hard to fix if we can't understand exactly where our children are at on how to accelerate them to that next level. So ensuring that it's seen as a progress monitoring device, not as a way to create more rhetoric of failure, but one that is used as a way as leaping them forward and moving that needle.
Right.
But we plan and we continue to plan to collect, but you do need to do it from every angle. We need to know what the families are thinking. We have to know how this is impacting the scholars. What did the teacher say?
Right.
You doing one angle on this academic isn't telling you much of anything at all.
Thanks. Anything to add, Leslie?
Yeah, I would say to this, when I was at HGZ, George Caldoun would tell me, people respect what you inspect.
Yep.
I would add in terms of assessment that one of the challenges that we face is that it's an element of white supremacy culture to overvalue quantitative data and devalue qualitative data and the voices and feedbacks of others. So we spoke earlier about some of the research around remediation not working. We didn't necessarily need those studies around remediation to tell us that it wasn't working when students were becoming disengaged and dropping out of high school or dropping out of college because they were being forced to take remedial classes, or in college setting being forced to pay more to take remedial classes. We could have just listened to people. And so I want to be careful about how we are assessing and what we use assessment for. Yeah. Assessment is not a tool to punish students. It should be a tool to inform adults, hold us accountable, and help us figure out how to grow and perform and be much better for our kids. So I think to the extent that we want to have any assessment, it should absolutely align with the vision that we have for what we want for our kids and families, but it should involve their voice. And so if growth is going to be about academic performance, which it can, should, and must be, let's not create new measures and new bars of success. Let's use the same tools that we're already going to use during the school year. But let's be true to our word and make sure that that data is a tool to inform adults and educators about what we are or are not doing to accelerate in learning, and not as a tool to punish kids for surviving a pandemic.
Got it. Thanks. So moving through the questions that we've received, and some are still coming in, we received a few in advance. There's this notion around high intensity tutoring as one really core intervention that we think can help stem the tide right now. So interested in if you have any reflections on how that's deployed effectively, if that is what you see as kind of one of the core strategies, and any adjacent approaches that are worth considering.
I can jump in on this. So I'm really excited about high intensity and high dosage tutoring. I am incredibly nervous about doing this well because the research is clear. And I think most schools historically have not been set up to execute on what the research says. So the research says a couple of things. First, it's most effective when it happens during the school day, not during out of school time. Second, the kinds of ratios that you want for students who have significant needs, whether those be students with special needs or IP, or are very far behind, is a ratio of 1 adult or tutor to 1 or 2 students. And then the larger groups are about 1 to 4. So I think most schools would say that they don't have the staffing model, the resources to achieve a 1 to 4 student ratio during the school day. I think what we do have as a result of the pandemic is a lot more access to technology and a lot more resources. And the world just looks different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 2 years ago, in terms of the kinds of resources that we have for individualized and personalized learning. So what I'm most excited about next year is us changing our school day format for us to have an hour inserted into the day. And we're not calling it a remedial block or a tutoring block. It's the acceleration block, where every single kid gets to work on something that is special and unique for them. And so for some students, we're going to be purchasing software and programs and online classes for them to do whatever that we couldn't afford to give them during the school day because we don't have the staff for it. And for some students, it's going to be a small group with a teacher that you love, working on content that you need to know. The other thing that I would say is tutoring needs to be just in time. You're working on the skills that you need right before the lesson that's coming up. You're not reteaching all of 2nd grade during 3rd grade.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd be cautious. I've been seeing quite a bit about tutoring and seeing the definition of what they call tutoring. It borders on a program when it's like 1 to 8 kids. That's actually after school type of ratios, or that isn't actually tutoring. And when we think of tutoring, I would ask that people just think of their own children. My daughter was falling behind this during COVID, and so I had her meet with a tutor. I was one-on-one. It was high intensity. It was just in time, and it was expensive. And that is the piece that we also try to do for children, is that we do it with an unrealistic budget, with low cost models, and we don't think of the management systems that needed for it to be successful. I get very worried of a 2024 postmortem of what happened to all the money. And so we need to be very thoughtful in how we spend it and think through carefully what we're doing for children. And maybe we spend more on getting the $60 tutor versus the $20 tutor,
right?
Because that impact's going to be real.
Yeah, we don't want to blow money fast.
Yeah.
Yes, to quote a wise philosopher. I appreciate that, Leslie. So when I think
Is
about—
that Kwame laughing next to you? Is that what I hear? Okay.
There's some studio banter and chatter going on. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So not blowing money fast is certainly a principle we want to hold going forward. We also want to hold the needs of our families and thinking about the sort of concerns they may have re-entering. So it's a 2-part question. This comes from some members of the HCZ team. So how do we address the legitimate fears? As we heard, there's been trauma. It's not news to anyone that folks are really feeling a sense of fear, potentially about re-entry across communities. And in addition to that, we're dealing with staff who may have their own trepidation and are also trying to engage families. So I guess the 2-part question is, how do we think about engaging the, in some cases, quite valid concerns of children and families about re-entering schools? And then how do we equip our families to, our staff to really welcome them back, encourage them, and foster an environment where there's a sense of safety and sort of belonging to a more traditional learning environment that we're returning to?
just say what creates safety for people. And that is going to be creating an environment of trust, right?
Mhm.
And so that means that you're being transparent, you're being open, you're telling them what steps you're going to be taking to ensure that their child will be safe. You're saying upfront you're going to be doing XYZ to ensure that their social and emotional needs are being met. And you then also, though, have to reach out to them, go to families' doors, do what you need to do with someone who they trust. This is where that community partnership with another organization like a YMCA or a Boys and Girls could really be invaluable. Because there may be a trust level there that the schools may not have at this moment that could actually partner and help get those kids in the door, because bringing children into a summer program is very different than school, and bringing them into after school is very different. Yeah, so you have to get them there first, and then you have to maintain them. Both of those should be a very specific strategy and a very specific approach, deeply embedded with trust.
Lauren, your comments about trust, remember that there's different kinds of trust. There's sort of a level of professional trust where I trust you to say what you are going to do and do what you say. And I recognize that because of patterns and past practices of your experience and behavior. And then there's vulnerability-based trust, which is I am opening up myself to you about something that is deeply uncomfortable to me, without the promise that you are going to respond great, but I have faith that you're going to respond in terms of support. And I think we need both right now. Our schools need for us to tell us what we need to tell our constituents and family members and staff members, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it, and we execute on it consistently. But we also need to be transparent to our schools about, we have these fears too as adults, and we are managing multiple different fears. And this is the best way that we can think through it. And if you have other ways of engaging us, then please, we are all ears and open. I think people also need time. So I think adults need time to be in the space on their own and get used to being in person before they can welcome back kids. We haven't thought about creating that same kind of time for families. And quite frankly, like, it hasn't been possible because of COVID. What we try to do is take pictures of classrooms, take photos of classrooms, do virtual tours to show families this is what the space is going to look like. What I'm excited for us to do in the future is ask families what they want the space to look like. And then what their real fears are. And we're hearing a lot of it is around public transportation, how to get to us, and not just what happens before or after that, what happens before and after that they're in our doors and spaces.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective. Another great question from the HCZ team. So what are some of the key strategies that we're often looking at starting in the summer that we should really be continuing year round? And I guess to frame it differently, there are a lot of interventions that I think are popping up this time of year that we see as perennial. Oh, we're thinking about different kinds of interactive learning to get folks on board. And we have a robust summer and after school department here at HCZ, but that isn't always top of mind for educators from, call it, September to June. So how can we center some of those and make them stick more during the academic year?
So I think the first thing that we've heard repeatedly over the course of this webinar, whether it was with Randi Weingarten, Aaron Philip Dworkin, with Lauren, with me, is that it cannot just be a focus on academics and remediation. And I think the purpose of an extended school year, the purpose of an extended school day, the purpose of summer learning opportunities is to make sure that kids are getting access to all of this kind of learning that we sometimes don't prioritize during the school day. I think for us, it's no longer a question of, are we not prioritizing these things during the school day, but how do we make them a regular part and parcel of who we are as a school? So it shouldn't take until after school or summer when you are finally having an opportunity to explore coding or robotics or visual arts or performing arts. You got to figure out a way to make those opportunities available, if not during the school day, at least part of what we envision the school day to be with extended learning. So I think that's one best practice. The second thing, and I see this question coming up in the chat about how do we create this, how do we address the power imbalance between schools and CBOs during school and out of school time? And I really do think it's about incorporating those traditional after school elements into the school day and using some of these resources that we have to reimagine our staffing model and pay folks what they are worth and value an excellent dance teacher the way that we value a great algebra teacher.
Powerful. Anything you'd add, Lauren?
Agreeing with what he said, I'm glad you just brought up that piece on paying people for what they're worth. That is actually essential. where it is a field that is ripe with turnover and long-term sustainability, and they are typically people from the community who actually know those scholars best and their environment. So how do we value that at a much higher level and pay them what they're worth, which means that we need to put more funding into this in totality. And what I'd love to see stay in general, what I hope changes is that in 2024, when this funding that Aaron went over it runs out in essence, that there is enough momentum so that culture changes, so that we don't see all the activities that happen after the 2 p.m. bell, 3 p.m. bell,
Right.
Being an opportunity for those children over here. And these kids might get something. They often do not. And what they do get may not be at the same level of same level of experience or quality. Hopefully this held this all to start having a conversation that this is not supplementary, maybe they should have, that it is actually essential in order for them to create a trajectory of economic mobility and to reach graduation. We must start looking at the pipeline of activities that has to happen and not just see it as a responsibility of the 8 to 2 day for the school district.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one thing. Sorry, just one thing to double down on the question about like, what are some of the key strategies that we should be looking at during the summer to extend the school year? I would also flip it. I would say it's not just the emphasis on social emotional learning and other types of learning during the summer that should translate into the school year.
Yeah.
The emphasis on small groups and small group tutoring has to be true in a summer learning space as well. So creating the kinds of staffing models or using technology to make sure that tutoring ratios or acceleration ratios are really, really small is critical. And it's also going to be really important in summer learning or out of school times where the staff might not have the same expertise or skill managing large groups of students. Creating those smaller ratios will make sure that people feel really successful, and we'll make sure that they actually are successful in the long run professionally.
Great, great. These perspectives are so powerful and in some ways complementary because we're hearing sort of different sides of the equation when you think about the services provided and the array of supports that we know are required and in the traditional K-12 setting. So really powerful to have you both here. And before we wrap up, just want to see if there are any closing remarks you would impart upon the group. There's obviously a lot to be covered here. We could spend all afternoon on this, but if there are any just high level takeaways on how we move past this phase and really use the term I've heard used a lot coming out of COVID is this portal we're in to potentially re-enter into a new world that's more equitable and serving our communities in a deeper, more effective way. What would you leave our audience with? And let's start with you, Lauren.
I think we all collectively in the space want to see what I was just saying, this momentum for continued change past when the funding is not there, because where you put your funding, I always tell our team, our budget is our roadmap to what we want to achieve and where we want to go. I hope as a country that we see this as the same thing. If we want to achieve great things, if we want to see equity, then we need to see the budgeting being the roadway to get there. But when we look at who, I would say that we have to look in the mirror. This has to come from all of the adults who are working with the children on a day-to-day basis to be the advocates and lifting up their voices on what they need in order to get to that next level. It's often who should do this? And I'd say it should be you who should be doing this. We all need to step up to the plate, every single one of us. Take the steps necessary, advocate in every scenario that you're in, and use your voice to elevate those whose voice cannot be heard.
Thank you. Leslie?
I think the closing words that I would suggest are language matters and the research matters. And so communicating to our kids and families lessons of learning loss, or that there's an emphasis on remediation and that our kids are underperforming is going to have the exact opposite effect of what we want to be true years from now. I would actually start with the vision of what we want to be true. And I would encourage us to not just be bold, but to be a little bit crazy. If we are not laughing at our vision and our dreams and think that it's a little bit unrealistic, then we're not doing the right thing. I would think of these federal funds as not just a moonshot, but the literal rocket on a space shuttle. These funds aren't going to be here forever. They're not going to last very long, but the amount of effort, energy, and force that it should give us should be able to propel us to exactly where we want to be. So put differently, if you want to be in space, if you want to be on Mars, if you want to be on Elon Musk and orbiting in a different world, and how are we going to use the millions of dollars that are at our disposal to get us there? because years from now, those funds aren't going to be there. The rockets are going to fall back to Earth, but we need to be orbiting in a different kind of future. And that's what I'm really hopeful for with these funds. What can we use to propel us? What's the vision for where we want to be after this?
That's great. Thank you so much, Leslie. The big, bold thinking really resonates. It sounds like someone who might have spent some time at HCZ. So I appreciate that perspective. Good to know. We'll take some of the credit for getting that into the water out there, but really appreciate your leadership, both Lauren and Leslie. It's been an honor to have you with us. You all are playing key roles in what Kwame referred to earlier as this nation building work. And we're looking forward to seeing what you're going to be building over the next year and the years to come, and looking forward to partnering with you as well. So thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Kwame, who's going to close this out. But it looks like Leslie learned a thing or two out here, man.
Nah, it's just being able to see his leadership.
Yes.
I mean, he's someone I look up to, all right? And just the power of that conversation.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about this idea of lifelong learners, right? And too often in the education space, we don't want to ask for help.
That's right.
Right? There's like a martyr syndrome that we have, and we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel, and Aaron warned us against that earlier.
That's right.
So to be able to see leaders like Lauren, leaders like Leslie, I have a page full of notes
Yeah.
and quotables and powerful metaphors that
Right.
they had articulated, but it's special to be a part of this community of practice,
Yes.
right? And it's the constant reminder that it is our responsibility as adults to be able to ask the tough questions and hold each other collectively accountable for this work, right? And this idea of thinking boldly or operating in a new orbit.
That's right.
This is an opportunity for us to truly embrace innovation, right? And to try new things. But as Lauren reminds us, we have to be responsible stewards for limited resources.
Yes.
Right? The resources aren't always going to be here. So the strategic planning approach that we take, how do we center the voice of the community?
Right.
How do we reimagine how this work is possible is quite powerful. I'm super energized and just really, really excited about that conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you to that team again. That was incredible, and we'll be talking about this for the time to come here at HCZ.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Such a amazing hour and a half that we just spent together, right? I have top of my mind, Randi saying, let's help our young people get their mojo back. And then Aaron also said something that was really, really powerful in terms of the quality of services that we must strive for, right? And the framework that we should be approaching that is, would you pay dollars to put your own child in these programs, right? Too often we keep thinking about other communities or someone else's children, but they're our children. In the same way that we would demand a level of excellence for our own children, is the same level of excellence that we are demanding for our communities. And we have that opportunity. And with that last conversation that we had with Lauren and Leslie, this idea of really pushing innovative thinking, really pushing the envelope about how do we have a different visualization of our classrooms? How do we incorporate some of the best practices that is traditionally held as after school, inside the school day? How do we think about the entire school year from a different perspective, right? But how do we continue to center the voices, the wants, the desires, the expertise of those who we are serving, right? That's so critically important. And I'm excited for this opportunity because what we do now sets the course for the future. The decisions that we make, the new tables that we create, the different type of thinking that we invite to the table, that diversity of thought, that diversity of spirit, that diversity of expertise is what's going to take us to the next level. So I'm so overjoyed. I'm ready to hit the ground running and just incredibly grateful to be a part of this collective community of practice, right? This national community of practice. So some housekeeping things. I do want to emphasize, please do not forget to take the survey that we'll be sending at the conclusion of this webinar. That feedback and that input is so valuable because it informs the content and the subjects that we will touch with future webinars that we plan to hold consistently. I think one of the key tools at the Institute's disposal is the power of being able to convene a national group together to be able to do joint problem solving sessions, right? Because we are partners in earnest, right? Not for lip service. There is so much intelligence and collective expertise that exists among us, and it is our responsibility to continue to harness that power to bring us together so that we can share with one another. So with that said, we hope you found this very informative. There were so many key learnings to be able to take from this. We will absolutely put the recording of this webinar on our website at hcz.org. So looking forward to continuing the conversation, and you all have a wonderful day. Take care.